Welcome to Finding Hope, the End to Suffering. Hosted by psychologist, author, and co-founder of the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership, Dr. Barry Weinhold, with national radio host, award-winning producer, and inspirational speaker, Patricia Raskin.
Welcome to Finding Hope, the End to Suffering, with Barry Weinhold and me, the co-host Patricia Raskin. This is Barry's brainchild. I mean, Barry has been in this business for many decades, written over 60 books, and is an expert in really understanding finding hope and working with couples and individuals to really make their life better. And he really gets to the heart of the matter. And so Barry's idea was to create this podcast so that we could interview people who, in fact, have been through a lot of challenges and have found hope, whether it's themselves or family members, or in today's case, Barry, it's going to be movies. People are finding hope through watching movies and understanding the difficulties.
Yeah. Well, today I'm finding hope that we're finally nearing the end of the pandemic, and some of the things that I typically do are going to be more readily available, like live music. There's a lot of outdoor concerts here in Colorado Springs this summer. I'm planning to attend a lot of those. I got a good fly fishing trip in last week, so I'm getting into summer finally, and so is the weather. It was very dreary over Memorial Day, but now summer has arrived, and the temperatures in the high 80s and low 90s, and with low humidity, so it's very comfortable.
Good.
So, yeah, and we started this show in March, and we kind of projected it as a 9-month project, as a startup of our nonprofit institute, the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership, and they are the main sponsor. And so we've now reached a point about halfway where we want to look at, can we raise any funds to help support this project? Because at the end of 9 months, Circle will no longer have startup money behind it, and we have to find other sources. So I'm calling upon our audience to donate money to help us continue this podcast. All donations to the podcast are tax deductible. They all are to our nonprofit tax exempt organization that's the sponsor. So anything that you donate will be a tax deduction if you use Schedule C. So I had our media expert put some information on the actual site about how to do that. So you can check the actual site for information on this YouTube site, for information about how to donate to Circle. And it's very easy. It's up there with just a button or a link that you click, and it'll take you right to the site where you can use your credit card and make a donation. And then you will get a receipt, which will then be your record that you can use for tax purposes. So we're looking at how to sustain this over the long haul. I mean, I think we got off to a good start, and I'd like to make sure that we can keep doing this for some time.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think what makes this compelling, Barry, is that it's one thing for you to write a book and to tell people about things, but it's another thing for people to come on the program and really share their stories.
That's right. And
I've been through this.
Much more interactive and lively. And we're also interested in any feedback. If people have questions, or if they have comments or any feedback, please register them on the YouTube site. Or there are other places, emails that you can send directly to us, anything that you want to tell us about, what you like, what you don't like, whatever. So anyway, today, we're kind of doing something a little different, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, me too.
And do you know what mirror neurons are?
I know what neurons are. I don't know what mirror neurons are.
Mirror, like looking in the mirror.
Right.
Mirror neurons. They're right here in our brain, right above the temples on the side. And when we watch a movie, those mirror neurons are operating overtime, because what the mirror neurons do is it helps us identify with the characters in the movies.
Mm.
And it's also the place where we have empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And so empathy is one of our wired into us as a human characteristic. And so when we are in an audience watching a movie, or at home on television watching a movie, we're actually using our mirror neurons to identify with the characters. And what they're doing, we're watching very carefully and identifying with them. And that's why we cry at movies, we laugh at the jokes, and it's even why we even watch horror movies, because we know it's going to scare us, but we're trying to learn something about how to handle that, because probably we're scared like that are not as bad as that.
So you're saying it's like a vicarious experience. It's like
very vicarious. Great word. Yeah.
Instead of being there, but you're there. You're just more of an observer.
So our show this month, our episodes this month, are going to be devoted to how to help people get more out of watching movies.
Mm-hmm.
How to help them use their mirror neurons to really to their best advantage. So actually, and before we bring George Butte on to talk about that subject, I want to talk a little bit about what movies you found impactful, and I have a few of my own that I'd like to share. So let's do that first, and kind of warm up the audience to what we're talking about by talking about our films that really we like and why. So why don't you start, and we'll take turns. You do one, I'll do one, and we'll go through our list.
All right. I have 5.
I have 5 too. So.
Not necessarily in the order, but in the order that I wrote them. The first one I thought of was Sound of Music, which is an adaptation of the 1959 musical of the same name. And it's based on the memoir of the story of the Trapp family.
Yeah.
And, it really talks about, the young nun, and she's assigned to the naval officer, and she's the new governess of the home.
Right.
And, she basically helps to save the family from being trapped in the Nazi era Austria. And for me, what really kind of impacted me is I am of the Jewish faith. So anything having to do with the Nazi war, anything like that, the Holocaust affects me. And I was very inspired by it, but I also felt like, they took the best of a really tough situation. And in my opinion, they sang their way out of it, literally. They literally sang their way out of Austria into the mountains, and were able to escape. Yeah. But if they did not have that teamwork, if they didn't have everyone behind them, rooting with them, they may not have made it. Right. So it was really an amazing story of courage. I mean, it looked pretty, they go up in the mountains and sing, but I mean, to be able to do that takes courage.
The hills are alive.
Right.
With The Sound of Music. Great one. And the one that I would, on top of my list, is the movie Prince of Tides. I don't know if you saw that one. I've seen it about 5 times now. It's based on the novel by Pat Conroy, and it's really starred Barbra Streisand and Nick Nolte, and it really touched me because it has a therapist in the movie. Barbara plays a therapist, and she, by not being a therapist, by just being herself, she helps Nick Nolte have a transformational experience where he ends his suffering. In the first part of the movie, you can see the effects of him not dealing with his childhood and the suffering that he felt as a result of that. And then this scene in there where he finally breaks down, and this is the kind of the catharsis that he's always been wanting, but never trusted anyone enough to let them in far enough to let down his guard. So a great movie.
Yeah. I think my next one, which was one of my favorites, was Out of Africa, which that was, let's see, it was 1985. It's a romantic drama, which I enjoy, but it's loosely based on material from a novel called Out of Africa and Shadows in the Grass, in addition to other sources. And it follows a high-class individual. She relocates to Africa to embark on a journey as a dairy farmer. But on the farm, then other things happen, and she meets the character who is played by Robert Redford. And, they really fall in love. And I think the hard part of this is that it's almost that unrequited love.
Yeah.
They decide to see each other, and then he has to go, and then he's killed. He's killed in a plane crash. And it really, there was such an understanding between them, and it took them a long time to get together. And, here she is really having found something that's so dear to her. And then he dies in a biplane crash.
Right.
And then during the funeral, she recites an excerpt of a poem by A. Houston about a lauded athlete dying young, and who's not fated to decline into old age.
Nice.
So she says goodbye at the end. I mean, there's a tragic ending here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a beautiful love story, but I think many of us can relate to that.
Oh, yeah, right.
It may be somebody who's very close to us.
Not everything turned out exactly the way we hoped.
Right.
And we have to then deal with. The one I
There's
would
a lot of grief.
The one I follow that with is The Glass Castle, starring Naomi Watts and Woody Harrelson, about a very dysfunctional family with 4 children. And basically the mother is totally checked out. She's an artist, and Naomi Watts does a great job playing a checked out mother. And I think I was really riveted by this one because I had a checked out mother growing up, and seeing the role being played on the screen was like, oh my God, I had all kinds of memories come back when I watched this movie. So,
and I have to tell you, Barry, I interviewed Jeanette Walls.
Did you? Yeah, she was there
years ago when it first came out. It was pretty amazing movie. And I think that she still had differences. I think she forgave her family or her father more than her siblings did. I think her siblings did not, give them as much. So my next one is probably a movie that really impacted me, particularly at the time. It's called The Notebook. It's a Nicholas Sparks novel. Again, it is a love story, but a lot of tragedy, a lot of suffering, and it follows the epic love story of a couple in their 40s. And then what happens is it contrasts it with today, where the wife is going through Alzheimer's and she doesn't recognize the husband. And at the time, my mother, who is now has since passed, was going through Alzheimer's.
Oh, okay.
And I remember it was so, and I remember there was one scene where all of a sudden she started to recognize him, because you're seeing the flashbacks of the young love story, and then you're seeing it 40 years later when he's with her. And there's one point at which she comes out of the dementia and recognizes him. And then all of a sudden, as he's holding her, she says, "Who are you? Get out of my room." And that was really hard for me.
Yeah.
And he was so broken because it was like, oh, she does know who I am. And then she flipped back, and then they had to, put her in another room. And it ended, I think if I remember correctly, it ended where they were actually lying in bed together and they both passed together. So it was but it was painful.
Oh, wow. Yeah. No, I remember.
Going through Alzheimer's, you really feel that suffering.
That's really, suffering is very hard to overcome. And the one that in contrast, that I saw a long, long time ago, and I thought it was just an incredible movie, and I actually make it a requirement everybody in my family watches it. And that's Harold and Maude. And it's a story of a young man who's obsessed with death and an older woman who's obsessed with life. And I mean, what a contrast. And how she teaches him how to live and how to build his obsession from death, change it from death to life. And an amazing kind of movie. So, and I love that movie. Yeah. There's Harold's first.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, it's funny. It's so interesting because these are all so different, Barry, but they all have the element of suffering and love and all of it and getting through it. Right. So the next one that I really loved, again, close to my heritage, is called Woman in Gold. And that was 2015. And it's based on a true story. It's actually a biographical drama film. And it displays the struggle associated with Nazi Europe. And it follows an elderly Jewish woman and her lawyer's battle to retrieve stolen and confiscated family relics, specifically this famous gorgeous portrait The Woman in Gold, the portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer. And she ends up taking her battle. She can't get any lawyer, and she ends up with this young guy who's like green. I mean, he's like, really like almost out of school, but he doesn't have, he's not polished. And he fights for her. And he's, he could be a grandson. He fights for her, and they take it to the Supreme Court, and she actually does get this. It comes back. It's now, I think, in the Museum of Jewish History, or it's a museum in New York. But here's the part that really hit me, and I remember it vividly. I remember there was a point at which the woman in gold, the woman who tried to get the painting back, she had to leave her parents in the home, and the Nazis were starting to storm in, and she had to look at her parents and say goodbye.
Oh.
And knew she would never see them again. I will never forget that. It just pulled at me. And then they almost didn't get into the country. They had to lie, but they got past the guard to get, with their passport to get in. But the part of her leaving and saying, goodbye, Mom and Papa, we really love you. And they said, go, you must go because you will live. You must go. And she left.
Yeah.
And she never saw them again.
Wow.
Oh, that was.
Yeah. Well, my other one was Magnolia. Which
that was amazing.
starred Tom Cruise, Jason Robards, Julianne Moore, Philip Seymour Hoffman, William Macy, and John C. Reilly. I mean, just a whole incredible star-studded cast. And the whole movie is about how we are all connected but don't know it.
Yeah.
And I think it was a powerful message about how, we are all one at some very important level that we don't even recognize. And the ending itself was so weird. I've seen it about 5 times and I still don't understand the ending. I'm still trying to figure that one out. But Tom Cruise is great in the movie, and so are all the others. It's a sterling movie.
Well, your comment, I think, is very well taken about how we're all connected. I see it when I teach corporate webinars, from every industry, every kind of sector. But when you start talking about stress, and you talk about anger, and you talk about, loneliness and isolation during COVID, it's a common denominator. I don't care who you are. We're all doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's very much what you just said. Yeah. So my last movie, I just watched it again 3 days ago. It's wonderful. It's called Hidden Figures, and it's a true story, 2016.
I thought too.
Yeah, isn't it? It follows the story of 3 African-American mathematicians working at NASA. And I believe it was in the 1950s. It was during the space race with John Glenn. And they worked in a segregated environment, and they faced racial and gender discrimination by their colleagues continually.
Yeah.
And then finally, they were talked down to, treated poorly. Then finally, of course, it turned around. But there was one scene. What happened is the women had to go to a segregated bathroom, and the bathroom was a half a mile from where they were. So finally, and this woman came back after the bathroom, and the head guy, who was Kevin Costner, the director, says, "What is going on with you? 40 minutes you're gone. Why are you gone so long?" And she looks at him and she says, "Do you know that I'm walking a half a mile every time to go to the bathroom?" And she says, "And you don't even let me drink a coffee out of your own mug." And she went on and on. And he looked at her and he said, "That's going away." He runs down to the other bathroom a half a mile away, takes the sign with a hack and pushes it with a wrench and throws the sign. And he says, "Now everybody goes to the same bathroom."
Great.
It was really powerful.
Oh, yeah.
What she went through, really, I mean, it was every step, and she was a genius. There were 3 of them.
Yeah.
And they all ended up being top people at NASA that really helped these astronauts get on the moon.
Yeah. Well, my last one is the classic Groundhog Day, which tells me, I mean, it's so perfect because it says, if you keep doing the same thing every day, you're going to have the same things happen. And I mean, it just in the movie, it just illustrates that so perfectly. Until he changes his thinking, every day is the same, and his arrogant self just takes over, and he believes that the world revolves around him. And then finally, he wakes up, and it's a great wake up movie in that sense. So I actually watch that every Groundhog Day on February 2nd. Because when I grew up in Pennsylvania, Punxsutawney Phil, who's the name of the groundhog, was the predictor of whether there's going to be 6 more weeks of winter or spring was going to come early. And we always hung on whether he saw his shadow or not. I mean, what a myth, but it was kind of fun.
Yeah. Well, I think the point you just made about if you do the same thing all the time, you'll get the same result.
Yeah.
And we know that. I mean, we all know that, Barry. But
Right.
again, anyway, I mean, we all know it. We all know it's not good for us. We all know it's going to cause us suffering, but we do it anyway. And that's what your work is all about, is helping people break that pattern.
What happens is that people get caught in what I call their comfort zone.
Right.
And they don't want to, they do everything to stay in their comfort zone, and then they're trapped. They don't ever get out of it.
Even if it's not comfortable, right?
Anything is uncomfortable, they just avoid.
Yeah, but they're in a situation that isn't good, that's suffering. They're suffering, but they get used to it. Is that kind of what you're saying? Because they're suffering.
Yeah, right. Well, listen, we need to bring George on and have him introduce himself and sort of set the tone for the next 3 episodes that we're going to have with George's interview. So let me ask George to come from backstage onto the show. There he is. Welcome, George. And George is a good friend of mine, and I admire his knowledge about film. I mean, it's unbelievable. Every time we get together and talk, he tells me about some film and I didn't even understand the importance of that film. And so, George, you want to just introduce yourself to the audience and give them sort of a preview of what you're going to talk about?
Yes, I'm George Butte. I teach English and film studies at Colorado College. And my interest in my years, particularly the last 20, 30, 40, the last few years of my professional life, has been narrative theory. I've written 2 academic books about how narrative works in film and fiction. But I'm interested in how stories work and how different audiences respond to stories and why, how stories are organized. And so we're going to be talking about 3 kinds of movies in the next episodes. And I'll give you examples. Some of them may be unusual to you. They're all movies that are pretty standard Hollywood movies, nothing from some strange corner of the world that only 2 people have seen. But there are movies that are very complicated. I think great movies challenge you because they're often ambiguous and very complicated. And you may be shocked that I see Peter Pan, for example, the Peter Pan films, as really about a core wound and so on. So we'll talk about how movies work in complicated ways to deal with human crisis and the human heart.
All right, good.
All right, so Barry, this wraps up this segment, but in the next 3 weeks, we're going to bring George back on to really talk about all these amazing movies and how we can move to end suffering, to finding hope. All right, everyone. So we'll be back with you next time, and we'll be talking with George.
This episode was brought to you by the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership. Find out more about these resources at weinholds.org. Dr. Weinhold is the author or co-author of 75 books on psychology, including his latest book, Get Real: The Hazards of Living Out of Your False Self, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and more. Patricia Raskin is the host of the nationally recognized program, The Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show, and is currently heard on voiceamerica.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. New episodes of Finding Hope: The End to Suffering can be found every Wednesday. If you like the show, please leave a review and give us a rating.